announcing a double-digit boost to infrastructure spending and, of course, flagging the golden moments of government's achievements. Now, if you look at the key takeaways, it wasn't a very long speech. In fact, many people have said it was one of the shortest budget speeches we've seen. If you look at the key takeaways, Nirmala Sitharaman has stuck to fiscal prudence with a lower than expected fiscal deficit of 5.8%. Now, there are no SOPs or the big rural transfers, but she did announce building 2 crore more houses for the rural poor in the next 5 years. Then Sitharaman said that the government is close to achieving the target of 3 crore affordable houses. Then the country's capital spending for 2024 and 2025 has been raised 11% to 11.11 lakh crore, or 3.4% of the GDP. Then there are no changes to the direct or the indirect tax rates, no change basically in the tax structure. And the government also will set up about 1 lakh crore corpus with 50-year interest-free loans to the states. That's what she has said. So these were the basic takeaways. And of course, this was the interim budget. So not many expectations were there. But yes, has this budget met the expectations of the people? Just 3 days before, there was a report by the Finance Ministry which said that by 2030, India will become a 7 trillion economy. So if that is the target which Nirmala Sitharaman has in her mind, so what kind of a roadmap today has the finance minister really laid out, as she called what was for the Amrit Kal? Joining me now is S. Srinivasan, who's the editor-in-chief of The Federal. So thank you so much for joining. And we have two renowned economists of the country, Professor Santosh Mehrotra and Professor Charan Singh. Both of you welcome on The Federal. And let me begin with S. Srinivasan, sir. He will try and put the things perspective, and then we can navigate the discussions ahead. If you look at the big picture, Srinivasan, sir, how would you really see the budget today? And has it really laid out the roadmap in the direction what it was laid out just 3 days before in that Finance Ministry report?
Needu, the budget, interim budget, is on expected lines. There's surprisingly 2019 budget. There was a little deviation from what interim budget is supposed to be. This time, the finance minister stuck to that. She has treated interim budget as an interim budget, has not touched any taxation, just dwelled upon expenditure.
Right.
And, so in that sense, it's a traditional, a short one, 59 minutes to be precise, I think, which is damn good. And she's delivered it on very precisely and almost ticked all the boxes which one need to do as a politician before facing a general election. She has kind of tried to address almost all sections, women, youth, farmers, small, big businessmen, villagers, etc., etc., etc. All that she has ticked right boxes, and she's tried to say that all these people will be taken care of. There is a declaration that the next election is almost a done deal. That kind of confidence is what the budget tried to project. Also, it's said that the fiscal consolidation. Certainly, the numbers look good. The fiscal consolidation, 5.8 as a percent of GDP last year. I mean, in the current year, the new budget, they are expecting an improvement in that, and to achieve an overall 4.5 FRBM by 2026. So it appears, and I think they have got good revenue this time. They have managed to shore up good revenues. Having said all this, so one, we have two eminent professors here, and I would like to certainly ask them, what about this model of development? What do you see, which particular direction this is heading? Because there seems to be a very dependence and spending on big infrastructure projects. Really razzle-dazzle kind of. If you look at the allocations
right.
after interest payment, composition of expenditure, if you see, transport sector is the biggest one. Only after that is followed by defense. So there's a lot of spending on big roads, big railways, ports, and these kind of expenditures which is kind of a capex, but are these capex really leading to two things? One is this model of development, is it generating enough employment? Are they employment generating kind of capex spending? And two, also manufacturing. It seems stuck at 17% or something as against the target of 25.
Right.
So this and not the spending on social sector as opposed to this. There is a big spend on this, but if you look at education, health, it's been more or less, the
Right.
same. So, what is the kind of development model? Uh, I mean, I would like to know from these two eminent economists, how do they look at into this type to that at all?
Mehrotra, you want to start? Yes, Professor Mehrotra. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to respond very directly to a very direct question that Srini asked. And so what is the model? The model seems to be to keep the expenditure on health and education down and to use the fisc to actually borrow and then spend on government public investment, partly with the objective of making up for the stagnant private investment. It is only just beginning to show some uptick, but there's no uptick in the MSME sector in investment. However, so let me delve a little deeper into this before I turn to the second question that he raised. You see, the first point about the increased public investment that has to be made is the following. That in the last 4 or 5 years, what this government has attempted to do is to actually undercut the ability of state governments to undertake public investment. Let's just remember that historically in our country, public investment has been undertaken by the state governments. The share of the state governments used to be 2/3 to 1/3 of center. And in any case, total public investment was a small share of total investment because private investments are always greater. Now, I think your viewers need to know that there is it's a good thing that public investment is rising and that borrowing is being used to increase public investment. However, your viewers are unlikely to know or understand that when the central government undertakes public investment, its projects tend to be highly capital intensive. So to answer the question that Srini asked about jobs, unfortunately, jobs are, of course, they're going to be created. All investment creates some jobs. But are they going to be labor intensive public investment? No.
Yeah.
Roads built by National Highway Authority or airports by the Airport Authority or expansion of ports are essentially heavy capital intensive activities. So most of the jobs which result from growing investment come from private investment or from state governments investment. State governments have smaller projects and they tend to use, relative to the central government, more labor intensive technology. So it's a more effective and efficient way of first creating infrastructure and simultaneously actually generating jobs. This country is in desperate need for more jobs. Even before COVID broke, the number of jobs that were being created in the non-farm sector had fallen from 7.5 million per annum between 2004 and 14 to 1/3 of that level, which is 2.5 million per annum in the non-farm sector before COVID. And since then, that has fallen even further. So yes, the big investments will take place. The big investments will go to the quote unquote national champions. The whole game plan is to promote national champions. And the unfortunate part is that certainly several of our national champions, quote unquote, tend to be simply in the space of infrastructure. They don't produce very much and forget about doing any R&D. The vast majority of national champions of China, of Korea, of Taiwan were all innovators. They were all manufacturers. Your second question was, and all this, let's remember, health and education expenditure, which I can come back to, I don't want to hog the show, is actually systematically been low in the last 8 years. What was your second question, Srini?
Yeah, so that was the question. So first was about the model of development, whether it's kind of this one, and second on education and health. Yeah.
So health and education, so I'll just make a few factual points and then I'll stop. The government came out with a national health policy in 2017, January, and it committed in 2017 to 8 years later achieving a public expenditure to GDP ratio of in health of 2.5%. At that point, it stood at 1.1. Since then, despite the fact that we've had a once-in-a-century pandemic, the expenditure has been 1.3% of GDP. Now you can turn around and say, but then health is a state subject, but the states only spend on salaries mostly, or pretty much, and some maintenance. Much of the capital investment tends to come from the central government. And if you watch the health allocations in the budgets, and I've been watching it very, very carefully, certainly over the last 5 years, you'll find that the allocations in current prices have not increased.
Right.
And education, believe it or not, the government comes out with a new education policy in 2020, says that we want to move towards 6% of GDP. Under the UPA, when I was in the Planning Commission, we used to monitor that very carefully. It used to be 4% of GDP. Under this government, it has been 2.9% of GDP. And this is a concurrent subject of the state and center. And the same point applies as for health. That means that most of the state expenditure is on salaries and maintenance, and the investment comes from the center. And the government, despite the two national policies, health and education, and all the commitments about expenditure, we're not seeing that. Yeah.
So this, the areas of concern still remain. If the job concerns have not been addressed, if the education and the health spending have not been up to the mark, let me come to Professor Charan Singh, and then again I'll go back to Srini sir. That Prime Minister, I was just reading Prime Minister's statement where he said that this budget is inclusive and innovative. Now, if the main concerns have not been addressed, how does one say that this budget is inclusive and innovative? Yes, Mr. Singh.
Yeah. So, Neelu, my own feeling is it's an interim budget. So it has to be scrutinized and critically evaluated, keeping that in mind. One should not forget it. Now, what is more important? Sectoral, yes, I agree with you. But most important to me is growth. And fortunately, as luck would have it, or the policies that we have designed have started showing results, whatever said and done, we are the fastest growing economy in the world now. We are clocking 7%, 7.3. We are aiming, and I know the potential of the country is between 8.5 to 9.5 growth rate. We are nowhere that. But we should also remember that recovering from COVID, the century type of a pandemic, was not easy. And no other country in the world has been able to recover as rapidly as we have done it. Now we have to maintain and sustain that tempo that we have achieved. So to my mind, the biggest thing is growth. How to attain growth, how to maintain that growth. So obviously they have tested it and tasted it, that capital expenditure has multiplier effect and is leading us to growth. So that's exactly where the focus is. So the focus is on increasing the capital expenditure to 3.5% of GDP. Now you are right. Will it be employment generating, or how much employment generating? Or will it be in high-tech investment? As Professor Mehrotra was mentioning, if you're going to be developing airports and you're going to be developing high-tech places, obviously it's not very employment generating. But to compensate for the high-tech that has come into these sort of activities, they are talking about startup, stand up, and today they have spoken about 1 lakh crore corpus fund for a 50-year loan on lower nil loan for high-tech startups, right? That is one thing. They're also talking of emphasizing on, and I think she made it very clear, if Lal Bahadur Shastri at that time, what was the Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, and then now we have also brought in research in it. So there is emphasis on research also. So to my mind, the focus has to be on growth, which I see the growth focus is there. As far as other things are concerned, I agree with you. If growth is going to lead me into a production procedure where there's not going to be adequate employment generation, and my demographic dividend is running into a demographic, or the fear is that my demographic dividend will run into a demographic deficit, then I need to do sectoral patchwork. That sectoral patchwork, they very clearly defined what they have in mind. They've said we are going to take care of the poor, the farmer, the youth, and the women. That they've said. And for each one of them, they have some roadmap in mind. For the women, they have mentioned that so many are taking the Mudra loans, and we are going to create so many Lakpati Didis. They've given the target of all those things they have given. They've spoken about the youth and the skilling centers where they're directly intervening into sectoral things. They've spoken about farmers, they've spoken about the urea, and they've spoken about the dairy sector, directly intervening into the. So the point that I'm trying to make is overall, the strategy is maintain the tempo of growth. No, look, it gives me great thrill with my age. I'm so much used to living in the Hindu rate of growth. Per capita income growth higher, they've projected 10.5%, but we are, let's say if 5% is inflation, then we still have some growth. But then, but if you look at the growth pattern of the last 4 years, we are doing 7 plus, which is not a mean thing, which is not a simple thing. So to maintain that growth and to take it forward to the potential, which I'm saying is 8.5 to 9.5, certain things have to be done. One more thing to create that growth environment in the society. Generally, the private sector, after having burned their fingers from the global financial crisis and the COVID and certain things that happened in the beginning of 2014 and in the first phase of Modi, Prime Minister Modi, then the private sector has suddenly gone into a shell and reluctant to invest. So what did the government do? The government said, okay, here is infrastructure investment, which I am going to do. And that is crowding in now. The private sector has started feeling okay. The flab has been removed for whatever reason, GST introduction or demonetization, whatever the reason, the flab has been removed. The real thing is here. Now this is what it is. We need to participate in it. Be it in agriculture, they're talking of public-private participation, investment, warehousing, and all that they're talking of. So an environment has been created where now for the growth momentum to go beyond 7% is becoming sustainable. That is something I like. The last point I want to make in this question is, Neelu, you have to look at, they've not raised the tax rates. They've not reduced it either. Right? But then one thing is repeatedly coming. The tax base has widened. That nobody is disputing and nobody will dispute.
Hmm.
So if the tax base has widened, some of it is compliance or pressure of compliance. Some of it is okay, let's do it now. We can see this government is working. We can see where the money is getting invested. I go on a road from point X to point Y. See, okay, earlier there used to be Kacha road, now there's a metallic road. So I can see the monies. There were hardly 70 airports. Now there are 150 airports. So I know where the money is being invested. So the tax collection has improved. Tax buoyancy is improving, be it GST, be it income tax, direct taxes. Everywhere you feel that the people, the citizens are starting to feel whatever said and done, it is becoming apparent that my money is being well spent.
No, but despite all this optimism, Srinivas, I would want to ask you that, several people on the Twitter and in fact, all the political parties also have mentioned this fact that, what's worrying is that there is a budget deficit of 18 lakh crores. And this means that the government is borrowing for its expenditure. Now, if you look at the roadmap for the growth, which has been laid out, and as what Professor Charan Singh was also saying, so is this budget deficit not a worrying factor on which the government can really be criticized the way they are going ahead? Yes, Srinivas.
No, I think as far as the fisc is concerned, this government is actually doing well. But of course, the borrowing is what they're using to finance some of these expenditures. And they have, in fact, done well because there's been revenue buoyancy. The revenues have been doing well. That's the reason. So I think in that sense, I have no big quarrels with what government is doing. The only thing which I think Professor Charan Singh himself gave an answer. So our a window for utilizing what we have called demographic dividend. If we don't have an educated manpower, if we really don't spend enough on education, and if we don't have a healthy demography of, assurance, because what they have done is they have actually given insurance cards. But if you don't have hospitals, if you don't have enough health infrastructure, and if you are not spending enough on education, where you are able to create a quality manpower, because the education outcomes are something different from actual enrollment. Enrollments have been doing very well. But so that's the question. Maybe Professor Charan Singh, probably what he's trying to say is that this model is a lot better than the earlier Hindu rate of growth, which we used to see earlier. I also used to wonder, looking at economists, that India used to be always those years in the bottom of the table, but now we are able to say that look, we have a 7% growth and those kind of things. So is this a correct approach? Is this because if you are not able to create adequate manpower to take advantage of the demographic dividend, which is not there endlessly, it is going to go away soon. And shouldn't the government turn its attention towards this as well? Because these big infrastructure projects obviously will create some employment. Nobody denies it has. But beyond that, isn't this equally important? That's the question I was raising.
Right. Okay, now Giri Prakash has also joined us. Thank you so much, Giri. How would you rate the interim budget today and the kind of roadmap for growth it has laid out? Are we in a position to say that India will become a 7 trillion economy by 2030? The kind of spending and the kind of roadmap which the government has laid out. Yes,
Yeah, for me, the interesting thing would be when the full union budget is going to be presented, and what it will contain. This some kind of a roadmap here, but there are two things that I want to highlight. One is regarding the kind of allocation that they have for the infrastructure, especially. They had set very ambitious plans to develop roads and highways, but now they have fallen short of that. And so where is the money going? in the next 3 months, they have to add around 8,500 kilometers. Otherwise, they're going to miss this target, and it's a pretty big margin. And the other one is the divestment target. Now they've actually reduced it to around 30,000 crores from 51,000 crores. So, as Srini has been saying that they have, there's no issue regarding the kind of revenue they have been collecting, but these are two issues that will actually determine how they are going to, what they're going to do for the next union budget, where are they going to get money if they don't meet those divestment targets, and also about road infrastructure.
All right. Professor Santosh Mehrotra. Now
Yes, please go on.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir. Srini, sir. Yeah.
How much time? I don't know. If I have just one federal question, I certainly want to ask both the professors. The transfers to the states, if you see, and if you look at the promise of the Finance Commission, what has happened here, if you look at the centrally sponsored schemes, and if you especially look at the Finance Commission grants, in 2 years, it seems to actually come down by 20%. If you just look at B to RE, it's 15% down, 23 compared to 24. And RE to B next year is another 5% cut, it seems. How do you look at this? Professor Mehrotra, if you can take this.
Yeah, well, the number I would look at in your graphic is the first bar, which is the actuals for 22-23 last financial year, and the revised expenditure for 23-24, which is the current fiscal year, which we are still we have another 2 months to go. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. So you have 1.72 lakh crores being transferred, and that's down by a whopping 1/6 by 32,000 crores. This is something that actually exposes the fault lines in our federal state and center relations, fiscal relations. This is very serious. I think we all know that the systematic attempt of the central government has been to mobilize revenues using cesses and surcharges, which don't have to be, over the last several years, which don't have to be shared with the state governments, which means by a sleight of hand, the central government is collecting revenues. Now, I have no choice but to remind all your viewers of an investigative report that showed without a shadow of doubt that the Prime Minister, when he came to power, when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, he always used to make a case for massive increases in allocations to the states. But now we are seeing the exact opposite. And in fact, when he came to power, he actually attempted to influence the Finance Commission, which had then just submitted its report, to reduce the allocations to the states. The then Finance Commission had recommended an increase from 32 to 42%, but the PM rather preferred to, keep the allocation to the states at 32%. So you can see what the mindset was all the way back. And this was revealed by none other than E.V.R. Subramaniam. Let's just remind ourselves of this fact, who was then in the Prime Minister's office and is currently CEO in the Niti Aayog. So, this is this is just going on creating fault lines in the center-state relations. And honestly, I'm very pessimistic about the situation going forward. The states are already very upset. I don't think anyone here even begins to recognize or understand, or among our viewers, begins to understand the kind of anger that is building up around this issue. because let us remember that one of the outcomes of the GST was that 17 taxes, a very large proportion of them were state taxes, including the state VAT, over which the state government had complete control, were all brought under the goods and services tax. A very good thing. We were all hoping that it would happen. But the fact of the matter is that NIPFP studies of the impact of the GST in the last 5 or 6 years, because it came into force on the 1st of July 2017, show very clearly that the states have actually suffered. So here we have a situation, and on top of that, as I was explaining to you just now, that the center has been mobilizing revenues using surcharges and cesses, which don't need to be shared. So this is a real problem. I mean, and this is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And this is going to be, and I'm finishing, this is going to actually blow up in our faces very soon in 2026 if a delimitation which was put off by the Atal government in 2002-03 comes up, because they know they have reduced their population growth rates. They know that their growth rates are much higher. They know that they contribute a much higher share of the total revenues in GST to the national pool, and yet, they are likely to get shortchanged.
Right.
We are building up to a very serious increase in tension in the country. I just want to close with one point about growth, if I may, because that was emphasized rightly, I believe, by Dr. Charan Singh. But let's just remember, we keep patting ourselves on the back about, oh, we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. Well, we are also the poorest, among the poorest economies in the world. In the G20, our per capita income is the lowest. More importantly, we were already for 20 years, going back to the early 2000s, the second fastest growing large economy in the world after China, and we have become the fastest. Thirdly, and most importantly, and I think this has to be understood, that the number of the growth rate is not believable. Let me explain why very briefly for your viewers. It's not believable because, you see, we have a very high share of the unorganized sector and informal workers in our total economy. And the CSO, the Central Statistical Organization, which is charged with the responsibility of collecting, of collating and presenting the gross domestic product, uses the following methods. In a highly informalized economy, the way they go about it is the following: that suppose you have the textile sector has both an organized segment and an unorganized segment. So since the information and the data for the unorganized segment is not available with the CSO, certainly not for the vast majority.
Right.
What it does is to actually extrapolate the growth rates for the organized sector, for which the data comes into the Ministry of Commerce, and then they project it onto the unorganized sector. Well, that doesn't tell you what has actually happened to the unorganized sector, and I need to close with this, and I think your viewers need to understand that the unorganized sector has taken a huge beating. And if you want, I can stop and I can come back in the next round. But I have the data in front of me on the estimates from the periodic labor force survey as to how badly the unorganized sector was mauled in the last 6 years.
No, but when you were talking about the fault lines between the center and the state, Professor Charan Singh wanted to make a point. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Srini, the point that you showed in your graphics is finance commission grants. But if you look at total transfers to states, they have increased significantly. If you take the actuals and then you take the budgets, or even if you take revised estimates. Now, total transfer to the states include many.
Yeah, it has increased.
It has increased significantly, not just increased significantly. Now, when you talk of finance commission grants, it is divided into various components. Under the grant for local bodies, urban bodies, it has increased from 17,000 to 26,000. If you take grants for local bodies, rural bodies, it has increased from 45,000 to 50,000. If you take for grants for health sector, in doubled from 3,000 to 6,000. If you take grants for incubation of new cities, municipal services, again, substantial increase. If you take grants in aid for SDRF, it has also increased from 16,000 to 20,000. Grants in aid for state disaster mitigation fund from 3,500 to 5,100. Okay. Then why is the decline there? Decline is there in post-devolution revenue deficit grant only. That is from 86,000 to 24,000. Under Finance Commission grants. But if you compare total transfers from center to the state, it has increased from 18 lakh 64,000 to 22 lakh 74,000. So therefore, whenever I look at these figures, I always look in a way where it is a balanced approach. And therefore, I'm neither startled nor agonized. Because the Finance Commission spends 2 years and discusses with each of these states before they make a recommendation. And these are never surprises. These are thought through, these are discussed, and on the anvil, on the drawing board, they are debated and disputed.
Right.
But once the Finance Commission has made the recommendations, especially on post-devolution revenue deficit grants, then I don't think it creates any ruffles between the state finance minister or the central finance minister. The key thing is looking at total transfers from the center to the states. Okay. Now, Neelu, I have forgotten the question, or Srini, the key question that you were asking. I've lost it. What was that?
Srini sir,
No, I was specifically referring to this, that I do agree the transfers, if you look at it overall, that has increased. But I was actually Finance Commission grants. I was specifically indicating to that, saying that there's been a cut in that. How do you look at that data? That's what I was asking.
Finance Commission
So-
grants have also to be, the next Finance Commission has already been constituted, members as well as the chairman. And it's the state finance secretaries who have to look into it and then settle it amongst themselves.
No, so why this question arose, because even Professor Mehrotra later referred to that delimitation is going to kick into this, and there is a certain perception of a disadvantage to the states because of that, because their otherwise indicators are very good. As far as social indicators are there, they're very good. Even the development indicators are both on the growth side and on the social side, they're all very good. And there is a feeling that whether they'll get punished for that, because as he correctly said, the central commission, government doesn't share cess, doesn't share what they collect. These two.
That question of
Yeah.
the
So that's why in that context, I was asking this Finance Commission grants whether it relates to that.
The question of the cess has been beaten about 1 million times already. Ask anybody, the first thing they will tell you cess. There's a viewpoint on cess, and that is well thought through, well discussed, well beaten, and we have already thought about it 1 million times. That's not the point. The point is, if it is coming under the Finance Commission grant, these have been discussed, debated by the by the state governments, by the central government, by the state finance secretaries, by the government itself. So if there is a dispute on the post-devolution revenue deficit grant, it has to be taken care by the Finance Commission. And the states and the center have equal right without fear. They have to discuss it out. And the Finance Commission recommendations, before even getting accepted by the central government, have to go through a certain procedure. And
Right.
these days they have a body, GST body, on which many such things which come are thrashed out. So I don't think that's a very big deal. But as far as I am concerned as a policymaker or as a macroeconomist, I'm looking clearly at the center-state transfer of resources, and they are increasing significantly.
Right.
That's my
Professor
view.
Mehrotra, yeah. Professor Mehrotra wants to make a point, but before you make a point, Professor Mehrotra, I also have a question. Maybe I'm a little confused on that. That's why I wanted a little clarification since we are discussing these grants to the states. Now, there is an announcement on 75,000 crore at 50-year interest-free loans to states. Now, does that empower the states as well financially? You know, and this kind of announcement which has come, it's considered to be one of the high points of today's budget. Yes,
Neil, that doesn't come under the Finance Commission. The point
Yeah,
that
that's a separate
now, which is
allocation.
being given now, that is the point I'm trying to make. So much of money gets transferred from the center to the state. All that does not come under the Finance Commission. If you look at the terms of the Finance Commission, they are this size. But resources that are going from the center to the state are many. So the one which you are saying today, one which
So let me
has been announced,
further clarify.
come under the Finance Commission grant.
Right. Over to you, Professor Mehrotra. Yeah, you wanted to make a point.
So grants are a relatively small proportion of the total devolution which takes place under the Finance Commission. Most of the Finance Commission takes devolution of funds takes place under what is a constitutional requirement that the center collects most of the taxes, the state does not, and therefore the center actually allocates on the basis of some principles, and that's one thing. The other thing that I think needs to be understood on the issue about the total, this comparison between the grants being falling, but on the other hand, the total being much higher. Let's just remember there are two other ways in which resources are being transferred. One is the centrally sponsored schemes. So there are still about 36 of those centrally sponsored schemes. Earlier, there used to be over 200 under the Planning Commission. That has been brought down. But so the resources are being transferred. But those are earmarked funds. Please try and understand there is no freedom associated with the centrally sponsored schemes. They are meant for specific sectors and with specific guidelines associated with the programs, and that states have to, and then the states can only draw upon the centrally sponsored scheme funds available from the center if and only if the state makes available its own share, which could be 50% while the center's share is 50%, or 40% while the center's share is 60%. And in the case of the Northeast, it's 10% on the part of the state and the 90% of the private. But there is yet another way in which resources are transferred, and which is recent and which has a deadline which will stop. And I think that's very important to realize, which is the following: that everyone knew that when the GST came into existence, that GST is going to
I think there's a.
I think his frame has frozen.
Yeah, disconnect.
Let me come back to that point.
Yes.
And so the point. Let me finish, if I may, sir. So the point is that involved a compensation. That involved a compensation, and the compensation has meant that the center has had to borrow funds from the market in order to be able to compensate the states, because the states haven't gained very much at all. As I was saying earlier, the NIPFP study has shown without a shadow of doubt that the states have actually taken a beating under the GST. So overall revenues might have been increasing, but their revenues have actually been lower, and they are supposed to be compensated. And that compensation is on the basis of borrowing by the center, and that's also due to end. So that's just by way of clarification.
Right. All right. Now, before I go for the concluding remark to Srini sir, Giri, I also had a question regarding these that, there's no change in the direct and the indirect taxes, including the import duties. Now, why did Nirmala Sitharaman, and given the fact that you have an election just coming ahead, there was a lot of expectations from the common man that maybe, there will be some kind of a deduction slab, as far as the income tax is concerned. She didn't announce any of that. Now, was this a surprising thing, or is it acceptable that, okay, all that is left now to the main budget when it comes up in July?
Yeah, I actually forgot to answer a question that you talked about regarding the 7 trillion economy. Let me answer that first and then I'll take this.
Okay.
For India to get to that 7 trillion economy by 2930, they will have to grow their GDP. I mean, it's GDP by as much as $572 billion every year, as against around $190 billion that they've been adding over the last decade. And also the growth rate should be around 9.9%,
Correct.
which seems quite impossible.
Absolutely.
So I'm not too sure. I mean, one can give reasons like say post-pandemic and recession across the world and stuff like that. But as far as this target is concerned, it doesn't look that it's going to happen.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
and the
Regarding
other
the
one,
tax reductions, yeah. And
yeah,
then
and the other one is, of course, yeah, well, let us see. That's what I said in the earlier thing, that let us see how and I would like to ask the two gentlemen, the guests here, uh, looking at the interim budget, do you see any kind of what kind of indications that shows up for the complete union budget in July? Will these kind of, I mean, she's already said that, but she could always come up with tax demands later.
Well, my views are very clear on this. I think nobody is going to take a policy holiday when you are galloping at 7%. There's not a pause or a halt button, and then you start racing for the next 7 months or 8 months when the remaining budget has to be brought in. So I'm looking at continuity from the past, at present, and into the future. And I think they've made it very clear in their interim budget speech. Their focus areas are on demand management. They're looking at the vulnerable sections. They're looking at Nari Shakti. They're looking at farmers, which could be vulnerable. They're looking at youth. And in all the four categories, they have announced sufficiently what their view is, what their roadmap is. They've also said that we'll continue on the fiscal consolidation. So they are going to behave in a very fiscally responsible manner.
Right.
Tax buoyancy is there, that is visible. Therefore, pressure on borrowings is less. Therefore, they could go correctively on the fiscal deficit. That's also very clear. The direction as far as the future is concerned, they've already announced for the youth 50-year free loan with the corpus, and they're also thinking in terms of specifically R&D. The last point in this I would like to mention, and I'm very happy the government has realized the socialist pattern is not going to work. The private sector has to be brought in. Private sector will have to contribute, and the job creation, asset creation, investment, private sector has to go shoulder to shoulder. Growth has to take place. All that policies have very beautifully been articulated in the interim budget. So I would expect
that sounds very optimistic, Professor Charan Singh. That sounds really optimistic. But one more comment I want from Professor Santosh Mehrotra, that Professor Charan Singh was just talking about the jobs, which should be given by the private sector. Now, if you do an honest assessment, has the private sector really risen to the occasion when it comes to providing jobs? That is also an area of concern.
I think this is the right opportunity for me to tell you the numbers on that. And I think it's seriously distressing, actually, because we know perfectly well that between when the economy was growing at 8% per annum between 2004 and 14, we were generating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs per annum. After that, when this government came to power on account of a series of policy mistakes, starting with the demonetization, followed up by the poorly designed and even worse implemented, badly planned and badly implemented GST, the economy began to slow down. It slowed for 9 quarters prior to COVID. And then when COVID came, the economy contracted by nearly twice as much as the global economy contracted. Why? Because we got a national lockdown, which was among the strictest in the world, according to the Britannic School of Government of Oxford. And it was a national lockdown. Even China didn't impose a national lockdown. We brought the entire economy to a grand standstill, so that poor ordinary people had to walk back to their homes. I mean, it was the cruelest thing that any government could inflict upon its own population of 1.4 billion people. The result of that was that 60 million people went back to agriculture over the next 3 years. The increase in agriculture is there to be seen in the PLFS data. The share of agriculture, which had systematically been falling until 2019, actually rose from 42% to 46.5%. Total number of workers in agriculture rose by 60 million. Manufacturing jobs fell. Talk was about Make in India. The jobs in manufacturing, believe it or not, which were 60 million in 2012, they came down for the next 7 or 8 years and recovered only in the last 2 years back to over 60 million. So, let's not even go there. On the tax base, we've been, 2 points have been made, which I have very serious problems about. One is the word tax buoyancy has been used repeatedly. You see, the term buoyancy is used for taxation when when income rises by 1%, but taxes rise by more than 1%. That's tax buoyancy. That's positive buoyancy. If income rises by 1% and taxes rise by less than 1%, then that's not buoyancy. And the important and interesting point that we need to remember is that for 25 years from 1992, the tax to GDP ratio was 17.5% in 1992. Today, it is 17.5% of GDP. That means overall, despite the fact that incomes have grown 3 or 4 times per capita incomes, tax to GDP ratio is still the same. Yes, of course, absolute tax revenues will rise. What's surprising about that? If incomes are rising, that will happen. On the tax base, it's true. It's true that the tax filers have increased to what? Over 8 crores to 80 million. But the workforce is 57 crores. 57 crores. Now, of the 8 crores that are filing tax in personal income taxes, over half don't pay any taxes. They just file. So, the point of the matter is that can you say that personal income taxes, the proportion of GDP, have risen? No. Had they been rising and CIT had risen, corporate income tax to the proportion of GDP had risen, then you could say, oh, okay, yes, there's real buoyancy. What are you getting is that people in the lower half, even among those who are taxpayers, who are tax filers, the incomes are not such as they pay. OECD, the rich countries, manage to increase tax base in the following way. The government does not go on raising the threshold at which taxes are levied. When this government came to power, the threshold at which tax revenue was payable was 2.5 lakhs per annum. It now stands at 7 lakhs per annum. If you are serious about increasing tax base, you don't do that. The way tax base was improved and increased in the now rich countries, and it was increased over a 100-year period from 1880 to 1980, the tax to GDP ratio in Europe and North America went from 10 or 11% to 44-45%. How? As incomes were rising, tax to GDP ratio was rising. Our tax to GDP ratio has remained stagnant, despite the fact that our incomes have quadrupled in the last 25 to 30 years. This is not the way to increase the tax base.
Right.
Sorry.
All right. So despite a positive and an optimistic roadmap which the government has laid after listening to this entire discussion, it seems that there are many areas of concern where implementation and how it will be unfolded, all those are big questions which need serious introspection and answers. But Srinisa, if I may ask you to conclude now as to what the interim budget really lays out for the people in the end, what would you say? Yes, Srinisa.
Yeah, so like I said right at the beginning, it's an interim budget. It's not a full budget. But then we were looking at the budget speech and trying to arrive at what the finance minister said. So there are some announcements here which seems very attractive as far as since it's an election year. For instance, there is a slogan of Vikasit Bharat that we will be soon by 2029-30 we'll be a Vikasit Bharat. So these kind of things are there, which I think we need to look at this very carefully. For instance, what is important here is to look at what's the per capita income of India going to be, and what is it currently, and what is it likely to be. Similarly, like Professor, I mean, these absolute numbers look very nice. Like Professor Mehrotra was saying, we also need to look at as a percentage of GDP expenditures. Where are we? If you look at education, if you look at health, if you look at family, other issues, obviously as a percentage of GDP, if you start looking at it, you may get a different conclusion. So the economy on the whole certainly has expanded. We are seeing GDP growth, and we have to remember we are going to the #1 most populous country in the world. So obviously those things are going to add to our economy. So obviously these questions will be raised, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion on such subject. That's what I would say in conclusion.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll have to leave it here. Professor Mehrotra, Professor Charan Singh, Giri, Srinisa, thank you so much.